Recording started.
Well, hello, and welcome to my presentation incorporating multimedia and field experiences. I am Doug Borkman, and I'm very grateful and pleased to have been invited to give some small portion of an idea as to how I use multimedia in my online classes. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank Donna and also the CCC Confer people, as well as the captioner, who I know is responsible for trying to get all of this down so that we can have some good accessibility in the end result here. And I would also like to extend my appreciation to Blaine Morrow, with whom I've worked. We did a grant together. He was the leader of the grant called the Project Meet Grant, and from that I think it ended up being a kind of a springboard for some other, particularly multimedia kinds of things that I and others have been involved in. I've asked the question, basically, have you ever wanted to take your students on a real field trip, quote unquote, using technology? And I hope that this session will provide some information on what you might want to take into consideration as you are performing as a facilitator in your online courses. I have gravitated to this notion of trying to do online field trips because of the fact that I myself am half the time at least located in Sedona, Arizona, where I am right now. I'd like to show you at the end of this presentation, if it's permissible, a little bit of a picture of my environment. I'm sure that for some of you familiar with the Arizona climb, you'll be able to identify the cactus that happens to be in my backyard that I'm looking at right now. But in conjunction with the fact that I'm half-time in Sedona, half-time in Southern California, I teach people up in, for example, Alaska. I work as a professor of both ethics and psychology with the University of Alaska. And then in addition, I've taught with Coastline for quite some time, Coastline Community College down there in Fountain Valley, as well as California State University, Dominguez Hills, where I'm currently an assistant professor, but I have there formerly been the acting director of the Center for Teaching and Learning, Blackboard administrator, as well as an instructional designer, attempting to help people do what I'm trying to do right now. So again, thank you very much for joining me. Now, why do I do this? Well, first of all, I am remotely located, and I have grown to discover over time, wherever I've taught and had the privilege of being able to try to provide some meaningful classroom experiences, I've found that there is an increase in what we call student engagement by attempting to do virtual field trips. But what I mean, of course, by virtual field trip in my own particular situation is not necessarily, let us say, going to one of the fine websites that's sponsored by, let's say, National Geographic or the Metropolitan Museum, although that's wonderful. But where I myself and or students and other people actually go out into an environment and attempt to bring their experience into an online setting, typically using Illuminate or Blackboard Collaborate, or something else I'm going to mention really briefly, although I don't want to look like I'm advertising for it, called AnyMeeting, but I'll describe that a little bit. I've discovered that student engagement, at least my definition of it, which is essentially responsiveness, interest level, the desire on the student's part to go ahead and pursue a particular theme further. I've seen that increase over time, and I've gotten some informal results on that from the many students who have participated in my classrooms and have actually contributed to some of the virtual experiences that I've tried to promote. It also came to my attention not long ago that certain financial issues plague some of the students with whom I've worked. They are not always able to get away to certain areas, locales, and environments that I think are really important for them to try to get firsthand experience of, particularly with respect, for example, to some of the themes that I teach, such as environmental ethics, intrinsic value, and things of that nature. So, sad to say, I've come to discover that many students are just unable to afford a field trip, maybe $25, $30 for trying to hire possibly a bus. Sometimes the institutions with which I've worked are also unable to come forth with certain kinds of financial resources that would provide an opportunity for our students to be able to physically actually go to a certain locale. And time constraints. It's a busy world out there, and of course online learning, I think to some extent, does promote the idea that people can tuck into their very busy schedules their schooling, their education. And I think for the most part that works fairly well for our students. I think that the ones with whom I'm in contact are very appreciative of the fact that institutions are attempting with their online delivery services and systems to try to provide a maximum amount of exposure to learning objects and to classroom experiences that are conducted, for example, via an LMS like Blackboard. But students, I find, in addition to not having enough money, really, tuition has gone up, and of course the cost of living in many instances has gone up. They're not able to because they're working 2 or 3 jobs and trying to take care of a family, and in addition to that, taking 15 units, just can't seem to manage to get out of the city or get out of the neighborhood in order to go on a bona fide, quote-unquote, real field trip. The remote access issue I probably dealt with already, but part of that is a little bit self-serving. I decided some time ago that, when I first came up to visit Sedona, about the time that ISDN video conferencing back in the 90s was being utilized heavily, it occurred to me that because I love this area so much, that it should be quite possible to be able to teach at least some courses remotely from a beautiful area, at least one which I regard as really beautiful, environmentally speaking. And so both for me and for my students, the remote access idea has worked out relatively well. Some of the students that I teach up in the University of Alaska are actually located on the Aleutian Islands, Fairbanks, Nome, and some of my students, as of last semester, we just completed a semester with the University of Alaska, we're still remotely located in a village that, it would be impossible for me to try to replicate the name of the village. So thank goodness there's some kind of a pipeline, some kind of a network infrastructure, and of course the way in which the students from the University of Alaska are able to access the courses, which we teach 100% online, would be both via Blackboard as well as via a teleconference such as Illuminate or Collaborate. And when all else fails, the good old, plain old telephone system works for those folks that are located remotely. They would not be able to participate in an adventure ordinarily that might involve going to the desert, were it not for the fact that we had the technology by means of which we could remotely deliver materials and a classroom presentation. I also think that there's something that I would like to articulate a little bit further at some point in time in the future, and that is what I'm calling virtual immersion. And that is the degree to which, as opposed to being out in a physical environment, at least one can try to bring as much as possible of that environment through the modern marvel of technology, cameras and things of this nature, directly to the student, either synchronously or asynchronously. And I have chosen to make a brief reference to some research that I had looked at some time ago in order to try to provide justification for embarking on this path. One of the items I'd like to mention would be a work done by Mr. Keisiel, 2006, in which the research indicates that field trips are essential for many reasons, educationally speaking. They provide real experiences related to content areas. This is a partial quote from the abstract from that work. A field trip to a bird sanctuary brings the sights, the sounds, the nesting habits. So there's a degree to which you get that simulated kinesthetic experience in doing something like a field trip, or at least something like a presentation that is done right there in concreto, so to speak, right in the actual environment that you might be talking about that is related to some theme or concept that arises in your class. A field trip to a sanctuary can bring sights and sounds, nesting habits of animals to life for student participants, can extend learning, provide a further framework for learning, And I do think that there is something that sometimes can get a little bit lost, not only in a physical classroom, but also, I think, in a virtual classroom in particular. And that has to do with, the basic concept of how people actually learn and remember. I do know that at times I've found myself, when I have a presentation, not like the one which I'm doing at this point in time, where I'm doing most of the talking, and I'm definitely thinking that probably my students are doing exactly what I'd be doing under the circumstances when I listen to a broadcast, something from WebEx or some kind of an internet-based presentation. That is probably multitask, and that's not a bad thing. One could be multitasking in the background and listening and observing in the foreground. But I do think that there is a degree to which, if we encourage that experience by not affording our students the opportunity to be able to participate in a more, I'm going to call it kinesthetic or immersive sense, that they lose their focus. And multitasking is just fine. I'm sure we all do it, and online learning has a tendency to promote that idea. But I think that there's a downside to it, and of course it's not the purpose of this particular presentation to go into the details of that, except to say that my purpose has been to try to get students to be able to focus and also to have something, a reasonable facsimile of what it might be like to have a presentation, lecture, or an experience in a part of the world that they have not heretofore been exposed to. So now I'm going to give you just some tidbits of some what I call field experiences, and I guess for the sake of classification, I would say that the two kinds of field experiences that I've worked with are the, if you will, real experience or the simulated virtual video experience, which requires the use of some technology. And perhaps some of you have done this, and I'm hoping that this bit of information is not going to be too redundant, just in case you've been doing this for a long period of time. One of the reasons that I decided to undertake to go ahead and share some of this with some people who might be interested is because of the fact that I have often gotten questions about how to make classes a little bit more robust, a little bit more interesting. And at least one solution, I think, is using some of the technology to splice yourself, let us say, into a specific environment, like a movie. And, of course, at the same time, consider taking your camera out to the desert or up to the mountains with you or to some place, and actually doing if possible, live presentation, given the opportunity you might have for network access, or can it for later presentation, and maybe embellish it a little bit using some of the tools that we have at our disposal, like Camtasia and some of the other studio editing tools. So I'm going to go ahead and attempt some desktop sharing here, and a screen should come up in just a moment. And from my point of view, it looks like that screen should be visible to you. So I wanted to start with something, a little video that appears on YouTube and also through a website that I now maintain and designed specifically for the purpose of this presentation. Right up here, it's called eeducationetc.org. It's a little website I keep for my environmental ethics courses. I'll go ahead and send a hyperlink to it right here, just in case the recording will allow you, and I'm sure it will, to be able to click on it or save it if you so desire. This first sample concerns something called the L-Cross mission. You might recall that NASA was very much intent at one point in time, a couple of years ago, of finding water on the moon. And of course, NASA has also wanted to try to find water on Mars, and there seems to be some indication that there is at least moisture or evidence of moisture having been there on Mars. There's some caps, for example, ice caps that are actually fairly prominent right now this time of year through a backyard telescope. But this, of course, is a more controversial kind of subject, and it has to do with finding water on the moon. Once we, of course, find water on the moon, if we do, that may set the stage for further exploration of the solar system, because we will be able to produce certain kinds of fuels from water that would be available as a natural resource. So the moon seems like the last place you'd ever go to find water. As you read a little bit more about it, and of course that's what I was doing with my students, in my philosophy and environmental ethics class, space ethics I called it, I'm getting them to try to understand how it is that there could be water on such a cold-seeming, atmosphereless orb as the moon. And it does turn out that in certain places that never see the light of day on the moon, there may be ice crystals. Now, in this particular case, there's some ambiguity or ambivalence about whether or not there actually was water that was found there. But the fun thing for me was to be able to get my class to consider waking up in the morning from the privacy of their own home and joining me on an Illuminate session, and then determine whether or not we could learn something from the projected time of the impact of the rocket that was sent to the moon in order to solve the problem or answer the question of, is there water on the moon? So this is called the L-Cross mission. And what I did, and I'm going to kind of talk over it. You can go to these videos if you see fit. But what I did was connected my own telescope through what is called a CCD camera, charge-coupled camera, relatively inexpensively. The particular telescope I was using at this point in time was a Schmidt-Cassegrain. And what I did on this particular video was try to re-record it from Illuminate by using Camtasia. Some of you are probably familiar with Camtasia. Let me turn the volume down a little bit here so it doesn't interfere. And what I did was not only connect up my own telescope through the ocular to Illuminate to get a relatively good picture of the moon, as you can, I think, tell there. But in addition to that, I also connected us up to a live conference that was beginning to materialize with some NASA officials that were describing the L-Cross mission. And upon the discovery of where the crater was, it was next to a prominent crater, Clavius, is where the impact was supposed to take place for this rocket to discover, hopefully, water or moisture on the moon. I coordinated my own telescope with the official NASA telescope, and we ended up getting some pretty good results, not only from my telescope and also the NASA people. Now, this is one of the things when you think about it that in all likelihood students would not be able to do unless they did have access to their own backyard telescope. And in my experience, I have students, for example, both in live environments as well as in online environments that have never looked through a telescope at all, whether it be Griffith Park Observatory or perhaps the next door neighbor's backyard telescope, or perhaps a star party, something that's I encourage people to go to if they ever find one locally. So I had a couple of students later on who actually logged in to the website. One gal, I won't mention her last name, but her first name was Marissa, got up with her family and invited her friends at 4 o'clock in the morning. She reported this to me the next day. We met at class after the event, and apparently about 15 people must have had something like their own star party watching what was transacting on her computer. So what happened here was that we were able to identify the area of the impact, and you're not hearing the audio right now, but you can kind of go back and do so. The mission control room, you can kind of see here. There was a picture, probably skipped over here for just a moment, of the control room's, there it is, version of the crater Clavius. So we have my telescope up to the left, their telescope projected image to the right. Now, what was supposed to happen here, of course, was that everybody, including your backyard astronomer such as myself, was supposed to be able to see some plumes of debris, and we figured out that the magnification required would be about 200, but nothing happened. So that became a further kind of theme for conversation in my critical thinking courses, and that is when you get all the hype about an event that's supposed to take place, and you're right there doing basically what's tantamount to first-hand observation, and you see nothing, then we have to go back and kind of do some further investigation, debriefing, and analysis as to what the conclusion ought to be. So it becomes a very good critical thinking exercise. But I was very delighted that my students were excited to have participated in an event which, by their own acknowledgement, would have been impossible for them to have participated in. Now, I had to try to, of course, I have to admit, offer a bit of a reward to those who were able to demonstrate that they actually logged in. I could see some of them later on. I for the sake of privacy, I did not include their names on this particular presentation, but they eventually, several of them did log in. And, of course, getting people up at 4 o'clock in the morning when this event was supposed to be taking place, Pacific Standard Time, was also a bit of a challenge. Now, this next one is kind of similar. There was something that I was involved in called Lunar Observation Day, sponsored by the Astronomy Without Borders people. And we'll just go through this really quickly, but what was neat about it was, again, using a CCD camera, 2 of them this time. I have 2 telescopes because I'm obsessed with the hobby of astronomy, though technically speaking I'm a philosopher, cosmologist type. My 2 telescopes connected up, and then we had a feed to one of my favorite places, Joshua Tree, as well as the Griffith Park Observatory. And once again, it required that students get online and see these feeds, and in this recording I put some Gustav Holst on there to make it a little more interesting. But as we proceed, and you'll be able to take the time that you wish to take to go over this, should you desire to do so, via the link I've sent. But an added value-added bonus of this was to aim one of my telescopes at the planet Jupiter while we were waiting to see what the results would be of the International Lunar Observation Day. Now, we were joined by people in Australia also. So we had Griffith Park, people in Australia. I think they were located in the outskirts of Sydney. Joshua Tree National Monument, one of my favorite places. I was located at the time in Riverside, California, basically on my patio deck, and thank God we had some really good weather to be able to accomplish our task. Now, again, I think that, for what it is, you might say, well, that's not really a field experience, but I think that it's about as close as you can come to it, given the parameters that I had mentioned previously about oftentimes the inability of students to be able to actually get away because of monetary concerns or because of time constraints. The prospects of archiving something like this and being able to refer back to it for future classes, create maybe some kind of a learning object. What's the spin-off from this ended up being several conversations about really what was going on with the moon and about our connectivity actually to other places in the world. There was a sense, you might say, I think the positive sense of global learning, of globalization. I'm sure that many of us believe that there's some also negative attributes associated with it, but I think that this event enhanced the positive learning in a global environment that was made possible by technologies such as, in this case, Illuminate. I'm an aficionado of Illuminate, and again, I'll put in a plug for CCC Confer. I believe that CCC Confer actually does an outstanding job of coordinating the meeting times. I use it with great regularity with my classes at Coastline Community College and also previously with Cypress College to conduct meetings and things like that. So I say that because the next episode is an experiment with another, you wouldn't call it, you certainly wouldn't call it a learning management system, and of course Illuminate technically augments a learning management system, but you would call it a video conferencing system. And it is called AnyMeeting. I fell upon it and discovered it and decided, I'm just going to play with it and see how it works. So thanks to Donna and DT and other people there at CCC Confer, my original recording archive was scheduled to be conducted earlier, I think last week. I got it postponed so I'd be able to catch what you probably have heard about recently in the news, the annular eclipse. So I went ahead and recorded the annular eclipse on Sunday, this last Sunday, May the 20th, and then was able to connect up my feed through AnyMeeting, which again functions very much like Illuminate, to a school in Southern California. I'm in Sedona, they're in Southern California. Talked to the principal, talked to her main teacher, and there was one student participant. But this is kind of an experiment, because what we are going to be doing with that school is, and I'm very pleased that this is going to happen, in November or December, we're going to be talking to the astronauts aboard the International Space Station, and the students are going to be having an opportunity to be able to ask some questions in real time. And I'm thinking that I'll use this in combination with the backup system of Illuminate. The reason that I've chosen to consider using AnyMeeting, and I don't work for them, and I'm not advertising for them, is simply because it's free, and even though it's free, you can record your session. So I'm going to share that with you just in case some of you have a budget issue, like I sometimes do. But what I was able to do here was actually train my telescope on the sun during the time of the eclipse. And we'll skip over my little intro. I later re-recorded the archive and made an introduction, tried to make a little bit of a learning object out of it. But we're going to be seeing the annular eclipse. And I'm doing what is called eyepiece projection through the telescope onto the screen. And I'll stop here and just say, you know, if you ever want to do something like this, if you want to do it with a microscope, if you want to do it with a telescope or some such other instrument, you can do it as a one-person show. That's basically been my mono theme, and that is, if I can do this all myself, then, of course, I'm happy to try to do it. It's not expensive. It's not inordinately difficult. There's some variables you have to get accustomed to. But if I can do it for dirt cheap and do it all myself, then I'm in favor of doing it. Many of my colleagues have often said, well, you know, we'd love to do Flash or Camtasia or something like that, but the time constraints that we experience and the amount of learning that we have to do just seems to be count against our successful completion of a project that we might utilize, or in which we might utilize some of these nice applications. But I hope this is a demo showing you that, you know, with a minimum of investment, you know, I have a little video camera, hard drive video camera, a relatively inexpensive, in this particular situation, a CCD camera. It only costs $90. I connect that up sometimes when I'm looking directly at planets through the eyepiece of a telescope, but even that telescope, which is a 10-inch Newtonian reflector that you see there before you on this particular screen, wasn't that expensive either. So I'll go a little bit further here. And so you'll be able to see that we are having some communication here with not only my location in Sedona, but now the Klein School, which is a private school in Southern California. My son went there back in the 90s, and we have since done a couple of different and important activities, and now we're going to embark on a nice video conferencing activity. So had it not been Sunday, I'm sure that there would have been many other students around, but what you're seeing on the left, of course, is my shot of the eclipse and the progress of the eclipse, and that's one Mr. Sean Butler. He gave me permission to use his name. A lead teacher at the Klein School, and was eventually a student, and I believe that might be his son that came with him. You can tell that the eclipse now in real time is actually, occupying, it will ultimately occupy close to 98% of the surface of the sun. And then that's the principal of the school right there, Miss Susan Klein. Again, it's that school that we're going to be working with for the amateur radio in space. Ham radio is what it is, with the Federal Communications Commission, the American Radio Relay League, and the astronauts aboard the International Space Station. So the overall cost of this is just almost nothing when you think about it. And I'm very respectful of the fact that most of us do not want to or can't really spend a whole lot of money to try to bring a kind of a field trip experience into the another area of the world. Now, I've since been in contact with this principal. I understand that they have made a lesson plan out of this particular little episode. Now, here's another experience, and I'm trying to work on something, and I'm going to, I hope, give you some ideas to how I'm going to try to accomplish it within the next week or two that will allow me to be able to utilize the shortwave radio system that I have and basically create a slideshow that can be transmitted from a remote place that has no internet, no web access, but does have the capacity to be able to transmit on VHF, or what we call HF, high frequency. Now, that does require a ham radio license. I happen to be an advanced class licensee, and my call sign is K6KDB. But the Federal Communications Commission allows you to be able to use amateur radio and shortwave for educational purposes. You can't use it for business. Whatever you do, you cannot get paid for what you do. And technically speaking, that may or may not be an issue that might have to be dealt with. But having conferred with some of their associates, running a class, let us say on a Sunday, when technically speaking you're not getting paid to do your class, but nevertheless running a slideshow is okay. I thought I'd put that caveat in there just in case anybody might have a question about it. But this is about as close to simulation as I have at this point in time for the event, and I call it Meditation or Musings from Joshua Tree. And what I did was, for my environmental ethics class, offered the option for people who could join me in the desert for a field trip. Now, this had been my students that were actually attending a live class. Actually, it's more of a hybrid class at Cal State University, Dominguez Hills in Southern California. Joshua Tree National Monument is about 2 hours, as you know, on a good day, from that campus or from that locale. But again, the students were just unable to find the money, the time, etc., to be able to join me. So I went ahead and filmed myself in the solitude of the desert, discussing a very important issue that we were conversing about in our class, which has to do with the intrinsic value of nature. There's a lot of controversy in philosophical circles, particularly amongst environmental ethicians, about whether or not nature, as we know it, has intrinsic value. So it occurred to me as I was sitting at my campsite, staring at these wonderful boulders, that I would go ahead and do a kind of a journal. So I decided that I would turn that into something that I'd have my students do, ultimately, and I called it the Rock Dialogue. Now, fortunately, after showing my students that via our learning management system, Blackboard, the day after I did it, we generated quite a bit of discussion and excitement and interest in actually physically getting there. And I think what happened was, about 2 weeks after this took place, this was enough to encourage a couple of students to get together, muster the time and the money, somehow, that they didn't have previously, to go out to the desert and do this themselves, or something similar. So I do believe this consistently shows that there is something valuable about exposing people to a place-based, if you will, kind of learning object. Now, the next step up for me will be to try my best to conduct this live. I've succeeded in doing this with fellow licensees by sending slideshows of the very scene that you're seeing here, almost like a PowerPoint, with a narrative. And I will give you an idea a little bit later toward the end of this as to how that is going to materialize, and how to relay that signal to people via the internet, because we do have the capacity to take shortwave radio signals and patch them in legitimately to do such things as retrieve email, send email via radio, and also to send what we call SOSCAN TV images that can be retrieved off of the internet in real time, synchronously, as the presentation is going on. So the reason I've chosen to do that, by the way, is because I don't want to invest in a satellite device. And the cell phone coverage out in the middle of this particular area, there is none. So the two main ways you're going to be able to actually try to provide some kind of a hopefully important lesson material is either if the students happen to be there with you or the participants, or if you are able to transmit your signal to a gateway that will in turn contact or communicate with the end user. So I will have, I hope, a really good soundbite of that in about a month or so. But this is where I quoted some passages from the famous philosopher Ralston Holmes, and had my students think about it. Now, what eventuated from this and another presentation I did was something I felt compelled to try to share, because I'm very pleased at the performance of my students and how energetic they were and interested they were in trying to do something of their own that was related to environmental issues. Having shown them briefly how to use things such as Camtasia and also one of my favorite PC-based application programs, Pinnacle Studio, they came up with this one. And we have it on YouTube. It was entitled, Where Are We Going? You might not be able to see that script too terribly well. It is kind of micro script, but again, I invite you to go to the website, should you so desire to do that. But what they did was cleverly edit and splice in some important bits and pieces of information about the treatment of animals, about the way in which we consume our food. And this was a consequence of some of them actually trying to go and find on their own where they could discover just exactly how it is that animals are really being treated. One of the other interesting things that we did there was teach our students how to utilize Real Player with Internet Explorer, which I'm sure many of you are doing right now, in order to be able to copy and convert various video segments from places like YouTube and other places. And for educational purposes, we checked out the copyright for that. We are generally okay, as far as we know, as long as we attribute our sources properly. But the students learned a lot doing this, and it was in part this presentation that they made stimulated because of the fact that they were given an opportunity to be able to have something like an experience in the great outdoors, so to speak, even though they themselves were unable to attend in some instances. In other cases, as I said previously, the virtual field trip, if you will, got them going enough to the point where it whetted their appetite for further kinds of experiences. And I think that's what we find in the literature I mentioned by Keisel. And you can go find that on the internet and some other places where, while I think it was specifically directed toward children, I don't see why one cannot expand the scope of that universe, so to speak, of discourse to include our student participants at the college level. In many ways, they're not so different. Now, another sort of thing that I do, and this is the one that when I send it out to people, they always say, well, how did you do that without spending a lot of money? And for those of you who are very familiar with editing and things like that, you will say, well, that's pretty easy to do. But there are many people who are not and would like to try to do this. And this is called actually my virtual immersion, or my immersion into the virtual world experience. So, of course, after figuring out the steps that need to be taken in order to use what is called chroma key, again, many of you are probably familiar with that, I decided that with some of my otherwise boring talking head lectures that I've given, that I would at the very least try to season them a little bit, make them a little bit more robust, by actually including clips of some of the movies that I use, whether it's in a philosophy class, a psychology class, an environmental ethics class, or critical thinking class. So I've got a whole ton of these now. I'll show you this really briefly, and I know that some of you probably do this, but when you think about the production values that would typically have been involved just a few years ago. Or I should say the expense of producing production values like this. This was cost-free for me. I just needed to put my hands on the videos that I wanted to use. And so in this particular presentation, I take a classic film called Forbidden Planet, and I incorporate it into both my philosophy and psychology classes. So what I did was superimpose myself over the film. Not a difficult task by any means, but of course the problem is that typically you do that like in your studio at your school or someplace else. If you have the facilities available for doing it, it's very simple. I did that in my backyard practically, or in my garage, and simply used green screen and took the movie Forbidden Planet and introduced it, and then also gave the students an opportunity to be able to get the exact sound bite. So I call that a kind of field trip of sorts into the meta space, if you will, of old films. I've done this with Twilight Zone and other things. And the reason I thought I would mention it to you here is because I do think that there are two kinds of field trip to take, at least, and maybe more. One of which, of course, is the one that I've been talking about, and that is where you actually go to a physical locale and do your utmost to bring the material to your students or your students to the material, which I do think does end up provoking greater enthusiasm and interest in the subject matter. Or two, you actually, right there, splice yourself in, so to speak, to a virtual environment and conduct a kind of a field trip there as well. In all cases, you have a kind of a multimedia notion here, based to some extent at least on Meyer's infamous or famous principles of multimedia usage. Some words, some text, some soundbite that is involved. And I have gotten into captioning my own stuff and putting it, generally speaking, on, let us say, a Camtasia program. But I've also lately let YouTube kind of do its thing, too, and I've noticed that that's not so bad. It's not so good, but it's not so bad. So I do try to explore as much as I can with captioning my own stuff so that it is accessible by the time I'm done with a presentation. And in this particular case, there is a quiz that the students go to that is flash-based, and it is based on the idea of the ego, the id, and the superego, concepts which emerge specifically from the script, really, of this movie, and to some extent from the acting. So now, why do I continue to do this? Well, I do poll my students. I've not really done a formal survey, and it could be that they're just being nice to me, but I have to tell you, even when I have not solicited responses from my students, just simply gotten an email, every now and then somebody will say, that was really neat. That kept us interested. I brought my whole family in to watch this, and then we had a discussion. So I'm sort of thinking, well, why wouldn't it work that way? Not that I thought or expected it to actually occur in that fashion, but why wouldn't it? I mean, that's what TV is about. That supposedly is, to some extent, what keeps people glued to, some crime show, or maybe American Idol. Though I personally will never go there and do that, some of those elements can be adapted. Now, what I had been talking to you about previously, about using amateur radio legitimately, the downside of that is that you do need an official Federal Communication Class license, but it's not too terribly difficult to get. What this will show you very quickly here is an example of a picture. This interface is now, we used to have to utilize a lot of equipment that was quite expensive. The analog to that would be doing chroma key from your garage, let's say. Now we can do it for probably start to finish about just buy the program, have a computer, $100? It used to cost a lot of money to do that, and the same is true of sending out a digital signal. But if you can kind of see here, there's a little line that's being scanned across this picture where it says CQ SSTV, calling anybody on SoScan TV. And what it's doing is scanning my picture to an application that now resides on your computer. That used to cost hundreds of bucks. Now it costs nothing. That's free. You just have to work out a way of getting your signal into a transmitter, and then also taking a signal from a receiver so that you can descan it. And this is what I'll be using in a couple of weeks in order to send something like slideshow images of the upcoming event that is going to be taking place, another solar event on June the 5th. There's going to be the Venus event, Transit of Venus. And I'm going to use not only standard video conferencing, but also SoScan TV to send out those pictures. So anyway, for educational purposes, this is great, I think. And for the fellow colleagues and amateur radio operators with whom I've discussed this, they're all in favor of it. In fact, the Amateur Radio Club that I belong to will be working with me to try to make this happen as effectively and efficiently as possibly can. This technology, by the way, is that technology that was utilized when the Voyager mission, both to Jupiter and to Uranus, sent pictures back to the Jet Propulsion Laboratory in Pasadena. Back, for example, the Uranus mission was back in 1988. I used SoScan TV to do it. Basically, it's an analog system. You generate these sound signals, these pulses, and it sounds almost like code that's being rushed at you at an enormous speed and a high frequency, but that gets translated into to pictures. It used to be done entirely on an analog mainframe kind of hardwired piece of equipment, but now we do it digitally. Again, doesn't cost anything, and my middle name is Let's Do It Cheaply. I hyphenate that. This last little segment was taken from the Klein School. Those are the people that I had contact with the solar eclipse, and we managed to snag the old newsreel footage just to remind ourselves as to what we did with the astronauts aboard the Space Shuttle, Columbia. And there you have some scenes, but again, this is a highly educational event. It was a field trip. This kind of thing now allows students. It's gone from the shuttle since, as you know, they have pretty much put it to rest. But now students can talk to college and elementary students both to astronauts aboard the International Space Station about the experiments they're conducting. And some of those questions that the students are trained and educated to ponder when they get a chance to actually talk to an astronaut are actually very sophisticated. Clearly, if it weren't for the fact that we have access to some relatively inexpensive kinds of apparatus, students of all ages would never have the opportunity to be able to have the kind of experience, I think, that can only enrich their lives and encourage them to go on and pursue their interests, particularly in the domain of science, philosophy, ethics, in my own particular situation. That's what I'm interested in. I have a link there to the ISS, Amateur Radio, aboard the International Space Station event. And I didn't want this to sound like an advertisement either for amateur radio or for some other things, but because of the fact that my own experience has sort of evolved to try to include as many options as I can within the domain of practicality, I've decided of late to go ahead and try to utilize some of these other, in many cases, sophisticated, but still relatively inexpensive methods for delivering classroom-type materials. So I'll be winding down here. I should reference the Myers multimedia principle that I think is probably one of the more important ones. You know, there are several of them. I've seen different iterations, anywhere from 7 or 8 or 9 or 10 or 12 principles, but this one I think is extremely important. People learn better from words and pictures than from words alone. And I think that's, an advantage of trying to have not only captioning, for example, for people who can look at the words that are being uttered, even if, they don't necessarily need to do so, but the appropriate pictures and putting pictures and images and multimedia videos in with an instructor or facilitator, in with the verbiage. This, of course, has been done with documentaries since time immemorial. But I think that it is only now really, at least in terms of my own observations and perceptions, getting more and more interest, or there's getting to be a more and more interest or a heightened interest level for instructors that are in an online environment who want to make their classes interesting, engaging, get their students talking and discussing. Some of the literature I read, particularly in the Chronicle of Higher Education, indicates that there's a retention problem for online students. I'm sure that many of us who are 100% online teachers have noticed that. It's not always the fault of the instructor or the design of the course that causes students to just kind of fall by the wayside. But there is a degree to which I think that we can try to make our courses a little bit more multimedia oriented because of a principle like this: words and pictures. And even though I've been guilty of it in the past, not just doing a talking head, but putting the talking head together with some other things, and I think adding to it some exercises, interactive exercises, at least a little bit of a quiz, and make it somewhat more relevant, and certainly put those field trip experiences in there as much as possible. The tools I use to do this, just to briefly summarize it, I'm a fan of Camtasia, and I also tend to be one of the people who like the products from Pinnacle. I went ahead and built my own computer about a year and a half ago with the specifications in mind of utilizing Studio so that I wouldn't have what some people have experienced, and I have too on occasion, certain kind of frustrating lockups and things. So if you're going to use Studio, you should have a relatively fast computer and a lot of RAM, a lot of memory, and of course a green screen. I bought my green screen from Amazon.com for about $4.98. It is a vinyl plastic kind of material. I just tack it up to the wall of my garage when I'm ready to go, and put a camera on a tripod, and then give myself about an hour and a half to do everything I think I need to do. And what I've gotten in the habit of doing is try to communicate regularly with my students, even if it's not a lesson, by using something kind of interesting that they might have been looking at. Not just videos that I like, but when I discover that somebody has maybe encountered a documentary that they'd like to talk about, I'll usually do something really quickly for just a couple of minutes to get people to think about what the class is about and what the themes are that are of importance to that movie. And of course, a cheap hard drive camera is a good thing to have as well. And I think I've kind of covered future directions. The one I guess that might be worth mentioning again would be the not only the experience that students are going to be having with the astronauts aboard the International Space Station, but also the upcoming transit of Venus. Now that's going to be on June the 5th, and what I'm going to do there, I have this website that is my astronomy fun website, and what I'll be doing there is almost identical to what I showed you with regard to the eclipse. Now, I would recommend that the word get out on the transit of Venus for the simple reason that while it happened in 2004, I believe it didn't happen prior to that for about 125 years. And it's not going to happen again for another 100 years, believe it or not. Now, eclipses are different. They happen all the time. But the transit of Venus, nope. So on June the 5th, I'm going to be online, and I'll be advertising this to my colleagues, my friends, some of my former students, since our classes just ended. In fact, I did my last grading, at least I think I did, yesterday, day before this conference, for that semester. But some of my students have indicated that they would definitely like to get involved with the program again. I'll be watching it starting at about 3 o'clock Pacific time through the telescope. I'm going to add one piece so that there's a slightly clear image, which is a welder's glass over the aperture of my 10-inch Newtonian reflector, so that I'll actually be able to pipe in a view that should look very similar to what you're seeing before you here, and directly into the platform I'm going to be using, which for that day will probably be Illuminate or Collaborate.
I'm expecting that the Klein School and now a couple of other elementary schools will be online for that event as their school day winds down, and that there will be profitable discussion. And it will be one of those things that they might not have had the opportunity, many of them, to have actually experienced firsthand. And now, why is that? Well, you know, we always have to caution people about looking at the sun. Don't do that with your naked eye. Get the right glasses. I purchased quite a few of those very inexpensive glasses to pass out to people that don't allow you to see anything but the sun, and they're quite useful. They cost about 98 cents a piece. But this will be another, you might say, extraterrestrial field trip. So I'm looking very much forward to that, and I hope that for those people who maybe encounter this presentation at some point in time and are interested, that you'll join me at that URL where you'll see all of the specific information. So with that, I again want to thank the CCC Confer people, Donna today, and also ET for organizing it, and Mr. Blaine Morrow, and also all of the people who coordinated the event at Evergreen there, and our captioner. I'm sure that that can be a very tough job. So I guess I'm finished at this point. I hope the audio turned out well, and if I don't make it live to the actual conference, I'm hoping that you'll see me virtually during this Transit of Venus event. Thank you very much for your time, and if you need to contact me personally about anything, if I can help you with anything at all, I do have a website that I decided to go ahead and use on Google with a rather, unfortunately, daunting URL, but I kind of set up a informal, not-for-profit consulting website, since I spent a good deal of my time the last decade doing instructional design. And if you have a question about something, I might be able to help you. So feel free to contact me there. My direct contact information is on that particular website. So I'm sorry that we don't have the opportunity to ask any questions. Perhaps there will be a mechanism set up so that should anybody view this and they wish to contact me, they can do so. That hyperlink there in e-education, etc. will give you direct contact information as well, just in case you want to get some tips or have some things you'd like to share about your own field trip experiences if they're very similar to this. So I guess I'm finished now, and I thank you very much, and I hope you guys, and I know you will have a successful conference at Evergreen. Take good care.